The bouquet of congratulations wilted in my hands as the words hit me like shrapnel. "You're done here. Clear out. His first day as CEO, my last is anything." The marble lobby echoed with the silence of 100 witnesses pretending not to see. But as I walked away, heels clicking a funeral march across polished floors. He didn't know about the clause buried deep in page 47. The one that made my name the linchpin of a $100 million deal tomorrow morning. His secretary would be the first to understand that some foundations once removed bring the whole tower down. My name is Alara Vance, and for 17 years I'd walked through the revolving doors of Viridian Corp like I owned the place. Not because I did. I wasn't delusional, but because I'd earned every square inch of respect in this 40-story glass tower. Project Director. The nameplate on my office door read. What it didn't say was that I'd saved this company from bankruptcy twice, secured partnerships worth billions, and knew where every skeleton was buried in every boardroom closet. That Tuesday morning started like any other, 7:45 a.m. sharp. I pushed through those doors carrying my usual grande Americano and the congratulatory bouquet I'd picked up from the florist on Fifth Avenue. White roses and baby's breath. Elegant, professional, exactly the right message for a new CEO's first day. I'd even written a welcome note in my careful script to new beginnings and continued success. The lobby buzzed with nervous energy. Groups of employees clustered near the security desk, whispering. I caught fragments. Wonder what he's like. Heard he cleaned house at his last company. Hope our jobs are safe. I smiled at them, the same reassuring smile I'd perfected over the years. Everything would be fine. Change was natural. We'd weather this transition like we'd weathered all the others. Morning, Leo. Leo from accounting called out, clutching his coffee like a life preserver. You meeting with him today? 10:30, I replied, shifting the bouquet to my other arm, right after the all hands. If I'd known those would be the last words I'd speak as an employee of Viridian Corp, I might have chosen them more carefully. The elevator ride to the 38th floor felt different that morning, longer. The familiar ding at each floor seemed to count down to something I couldn't quite name. When the doors opened to the executive level, I found it transformed. Gone were the warm burgundy carpets and mahogany furniture. Everything was white and chrome now, like a hospital ward or a morgue. Victor Sterling stood at the center of it all, and I understood immediately why people whispered his name with fear, 623, sharp as a surgical instrument in his charcoal Tom Ford suit, with eyes like a winter storm. He was surrounded by his own people, faces I didn't recognize, bodies that moved with predatory precision. The old guard was nowhere to be seen. I approached with my bouquet and my professional smile, extending my free hand. Mr. Sterling, I'm Alara Vance, Project Director. Welcome to Viridian Corp. He looked at my hand like it was something scraped off his shoe. Then his gaze traveled up to meet mine, and I saw my fate written in that gray stare before he even opened his mouth. Vance. He said my name like he was reading it off a termination list, which I would later learn he was perfect timing. The entire floor had gone silent. Every cubicle prairie dog had popped up to watch. The new assistants, his assistants, smirked behind their iPads. Even the air conditioning seemed to hold its breath. I've been reviewing the organizational chart, he continued, loud enough for everyone to hear, identifying redundancies, legacy hires who've grown too comfortable, people who represent the old way of doing things. My smile never wavered. 17 years in corporate America teaches you to smile while Rome burns. I'd be happy to discuss the current project portfolio with you. We have several critical initiatives. That won't be necessary. He cut me off with the casual cruelty of someone swatting a fly. Your services are no longer required. Security will escort you out. The words landed in the silence like a judge's gavel. Someone gasped. I think it was Diana from legal, who'd started the same year I did. The bouquet suddenly felt ridiculous in my hands, like bringing a valentine to my own execution. I see, I said, because what else was there to say? Don't do this. You're making a mistake, please. I'd watched too many people beg in conference rooms to ever lower myself to that. May I ask why? You may not. He'd already turned away, dismissing me with his body language before security even arrived. This is a new era for Viridian Corp. We need fresh perspectives, not relics from the past. Relics. 17 years of 60-hour weeks, missed birthdays, canceled vacations, and I was a relic. The two security guards who approached looked apologetic. Ben and Mike, guys I'd shared coffee with 100 times. They didn't meet my eyes. Ma'am, Ben mumbled. We need to escort you to your office to collect your things. That won't be necessary. I echoed Sterling's words, surprising myself with how steady my voice remained. I keep my personal items in my car. Company policy. It wasn't true. But I wouldn't give him the satisfaction of the walk of shame, the cardboard box, the pitying looks. My mother's photo could stay in the desk drawer. The awards on the wall belonged to a person who no longer existed. I looked down at the bouquet still clutched in my hands. White roses for new beginnings. The irony was so heavy it could have anchored a yacht. With deliberate precision, I walked to the nearest waste bin and dropped the flowers inside. The sound they made hitting the bottom was the only goodbye I offered. Alara, someone whispered as security flanked me toward the elevator. Sophia Hayes Sterling's imported secretary watched from her new desk with an expression I couldn't read. For pity warning, her fingers gripped her phone like she wanted to say something, but the words died in the Arctic atmosphere Sterling had created. The elevator ride down was the longest of my life. 38 floors of my career disappearing with each descent. Ben shifted uncomfortably beside me. This ain't right, Ms. Vance. Everybody knows what you've done for this place. It's business, Ben, I said, watching the numbers fall. Nothing personal. But we both knew that was a lie. Everything in corporate America was personal, wrapped in the disguise of professionalism. Every handshake hit a dagger. Every meeting was a battlefield. Every new CEO needed sacrificial lambs to prove their power, and I just volunteered for the slaughter. The lobby was a sea of shocked faces when we emerged. Word traveled fast in the tower. Leo from accounting looked like someone had died. Diana from legal had tears in her eyes. The security guards at the main desk stood straighter, as if my termination was contagious. Your badge, ma'am, Mike said quietly when we reached the revolving doors. I unclipped it from my jacket, ran my thumb over the photo one last time. A younger Alara full of ambition and hope, then handed it over. The plastic clicked against his palm with finality. Take care of each other, I told Ben and Mike. They nodded, Adam's apples bobbing with words they couldn't say. Then I pushed through those revolving doors for the last time, out into the Manhattan morning that didn't care about my tragedy. The city moved around me in its endless rush while I stood on the sidewalk, suddenly directionless. 17 years of purpose evaporated in 5 minutes of corporate theater. But as I finally forced my feet to move, heading toward the parking garage in the BMW that held the ghosts of 1,000 late nights, I felt something shift in my chest. Not sadness, not even anger, something colder and more precise. My hand moved to my pocket, finding the leather journal I always carried. By the time I reached my car, I was already making notes. Because Victor Sterling had made a critical error, the kind of mistake that only arrogance could birth, he'd assumed I was just another middle manager, another disposable cog in his machine. He'd never bothered to ask what projects I managed, what relationships I'd built, what contracts bore my signature. He didn't know about Northwind Group, and that I thought as I sat in my car and began to write with careful precision would be his downfall. The leather of my BMW steering wheel was worn smooth, where my hands had gripped it through countless late-night drives home. Now, sitting in the Viridian Court parking garage at 11:23 a.m. on a Tuesday, those worn spots felt like the only proof I'd ever existed here. My hands trembled as I opened my journal, not from sadness, but from the sheer effort of containing the wildfire building in my chest. 17 years, the number kept circling my mind like a vulture over carrion. 17 years since I'd walked into Viridian as a junior analyst with an MBA still warm from Columbia and a hunger that could have devoured the world. I'd been 25, wearing my mother's pearls for luck and a Macy's suit I couldn't afford. Determined to prove that a girl from Newark could swim with Manhattan sharks, the first memory hit like a slap. My first major crisis, 3 years in, Peterson Industries, threatening to pull a $50 million contract because our previous project manager had promised deliverables we couldn't meet. I'd worked 96 hours straight, survived on vending machine coffee and sheer will, personally visiting their CFO at his daughter's soccer game to walk through solutions. We'd not only kept the contract, but expanded it. That CFO, William Peterson, still sent me a bottle of wine every Christmas. My pen moved across the journal pages, chronicling what Victor Sterling had so casually dismissed as legacy, the Shanghai acquisition in 2018. I'd spent 3 months in China, learning enough Mandarin to show respect, building relationships with government officials who didn't trust American corporations, while other firms failed to navigate the regulatory maze. I'd secured permits that opened a billion-dollar market. My marriage to Arthur had ended during that trip. "You love that company more than me," he'd said over a crackling phone connection. He wasn't wrong. Then there was the Phoenix project disaster of 2020. Our lead developer had disappeared with critical code 2 weeks before launch, right in the middle of CO lockdowns. I'd assembled a remote team across 12 time zones, coded alongside them despite not touching programming since college, and delivered on time. The client never knew how close we'd come to catastrophe. The stress had turned a streak of my hair gray at 35. A silver reminder of battles won in empty conference rooms. The journal pages filled with names, numbers, victories pulled from the jaws of defeat. The time I'd caught our vendor inflating invoices by 30%, saving the company $8 million annually. The partnership with Aura Solutions that everyone said was impossible. They don't work with American firms, the board had warned. But I'd flown to Mumbai 6 times, learned to appreciate cricket, shared dinners with Aura's family until business became personal. That partnership had generated over $300 million in revenue. My phone buzzed. A text from Leo. "Can't believe what happened. We're all in shock. Let me know if you need anything." Then another from Diana. "This is insane. You built the project division and another and another. By noon, I had 47 messages from colleagues, clients, even competitors who'd somehow already heard." The corporate world was smaller than civilians realized. News of my termination would reach every major firm in Manhattan by happy hour, but I didn't respond to any of them. Instead, I wrote about the sacrifices that had built my reputation. The honeymoon in Paris I'd cut short when the Morrison deal started falling apart. The fertility treatments I'd postponed year after year until my doctor gently suggested it might be too late. The mornings I'd arrived before the cleaning crew and the nights I'd left after them. Building something I'd thought mattered. Fresh perspectives, Sterling had said, not relics from the past. I laughed, the sound sharp and brittle in the enclosed space of my car. He wanted fresh. He had no idea how stale his playbook was. I'd seen 4 CEOs come through Viridian, each one convinced they were revolutionaries. Each one eventually learning that business wasn't about revolution, but evolution. Relationships couldn't be pivoted, trust couldn't be disrupted, and institutional knowledge couldn't be downloaded from the cloud. My pen paused over a particular entry. December 2021, the Keller Systems crisis. Our biggest client had caught their CEO embezzling, stock prices in freefall, every vendor fleeing like rats from a sinking ship. But I'd stayed, more than stayed. I'd flown to their headquarters, sat with their emergency board, pledged Viridian support when everyone else demanded immediate payment. Partners don't abandon each other in storms. I'd told them 6 months later when they'd stabilized. They'd rewarded that loyalty with an exclusive contract worth more than all their previous business combined. George Keller had hugged me in his office, tears in his eyes. You saved us, Ilera. Not just the company. You saved the 8,000 families who depend on us. Where was that in Sterling's organizational chart? How do you quantify trust built over years of shared victories and defeats? How do you measure the value of a phone call at 2 a.m. that prevents a lawsuit? A quiet conversation that saves a partnership? A reputation that opens doors before you even knock? My phone rang. Unknown number. I almost didn't answer, but something instinct maybe or just habit made me swipe accept. Alara. The voice was familiar but stressed. It's Camilla Reed from Northwind Group. I just heard. Please tell me it's not true. My stomach dropped. Camilla oversaw our contract with them. A beautiful piece of business worth $120 million over 5 years. We'd signed it just last week. After 18 months of negotiations, I'd been the lead architect of the entire deal. It's true, I said quietly. As of an hour ago, I'm no longer with Viridian. The silence on her end stretched so long I thought the call had dropped. Then, Ilera, you do understand what this means, don't you? You've read your own contract. Had I read it, I'd written it. Every clause, every comma, every carefully constructed safeguard, including Section 47B, the key person clause that I'd insisted on despite pushback from our legal team. It had been my insurance policy, my way of guaranteeing that Northwind Group got the team they'd been promised, specifically that they got me. I understand, I said carefully. Then you know I have to make some calls. This is going to be a problem, Ilera, a very significant problem. After she hung up, I sat in the quiet of my car, surrounded by the ghosts of 17 years. My journal lay open on my lap, pages covered with the archaeology of a career that had just become a weapon. Because I knew something Victor Sterling didn't, something his arrogance had blinded him to in his rush to mark his territory. He thought he'd fired a middle manager, a relic, a redundancy. But he'd actually lit a fuse, and the explosion would come from a contract clause he'd never bothered to read in a deal he'd never bothered to understand with a client he'd never bothered to meet. I closed my journal and started my car. There was no sadness left, no hurt, no bruised ego, just the cold clarity of knowing that sometimes the best revenge isn't planned. Sometimes it's just the inevitable consequence of ignorance meeting arrogance in a marble lobby. As I drove out of the garage into the bright Manhattan afternoon, my phone continued to buzz with messages of support and shock. But I was already thinking ahead, seeing the dominoes that would fall, the panic that would spread, the dawning realization that would creep across Victor Sterling's face when he understood what he'd done. He wanted to erase the past. He was about to learn that in business, the past had a way of reaching forward and grabbing you by the throat, especially when that past had been smart enough to protect itself with contracts. The contract lived in my home safe, but I knew every word by heart. 3 days ago, last Thursday, I'd stood in the Northwind Group boardroom, watching their executives sign the document that had taken 18 months to perfect, $120 million over 5 years, with provisions for expansion into European markets. It was the crown jewel of Viridian's portfolio, the deal that would have cemented my legacy. Now, sitting at my kitchen island with a glass of Malbec and my laptop open to the digital copy, I traced my finger over Section 47B, such an innocent-looking paragraph buried deep in the performance guarantees. The lawyers had fought me on it, calling it unusual, unnecessary, even egotistical. But Camilla Reed had backed me up. If we're buying Ilara Vance's expertise, she'd said, then we want Ilara Vance, not some substitute the company throws at us 6 months later. The key person clause was beautifully simple. If I ceased to be employed by Viridian Corp for any reason within the first year of the contract, Northwind Group had the right to immediate termination with full refund of any prepayments. More importantly, they'd retain rights to any intellectual property developed during the negotiation phase, including my proprietary project management framework that Viridian had been planning to deploy across all major accounts. My phone sat dark on the counter. I'd turned off notifications after the Huneth sympathetic text, but I kept Camilla's number visible on a sticky note, waiting. She was East Coast like me, but Northwind Group's board was scattered across time zones. They'd need to convene, discuss, decide. These things took time in the corporate world. Time for panic to set in. Time for implications to be understood. Time for Victor Sterling to realize he just shot himself in the foot with a cannon. I pulled out my journal again, needing to document this moment. The wine was good. A 2018 bottle Arthur had left behind, saved for a special occasion. This seemed to qualify. Tuesday, 4:17 p.m. I wrote, "The house is quiet. Strange to be home while the rest of the world is still working. The afternoon light through the kitchen windows is beautiful. I never noticed before." The truth was, I'd barely seen this house in daylight. The 4-bedroom colonial in Westchester had been Arthur's choice. "Room to grow," he'd said, back when we still believed in futures that included children. After the divorce, I'd kept it out of stubbornness more than love. It had become a very expensive storage unit for a life I rarely lived. My laptop chimed, an email from George Keller, CEO of Keller Systems. The subject line made me smile. Are they insane? "Ilara," his message read. "Just heard the news from one of my board members who plays golf with someone at Viridian. Please tell me this is some kind of misunderstanding. Also, are you aware of what this might mean for the NKG contract? Call me when you can." George, I didn't call. Not yet. George would be another domino. Another voice of concern in the chorus that was undoubtedly building in Manhattan's financial district. Let them all talk. Let the whispers spread. Let the implications sink in. Instead, I opened a new document and began typing. Not a resume. I was done begging for acceptance. This was something else. A timeline of the Northwind Group deal. From first contact to final signature, every meeting, every revision, every strategic decision that had shaped the partnership. My partnership built on my relationships, my reputation, my late nights and early mornings. The initial contact had come through William Peterson, my old ally from Peterson Industries. His nephew worked at Northwind Group had mentioned they were looking for a technology integration partner. They're particular, William had warned over lunch at the Harvard Club. Old money, old values. They don't trust easily. But I'd understood old money. It wasn't about flashy presentations or aggressive sales tactics. It was about patience, respect, proving yourself worthy of their time. I'd spent 6 months just building the relationship before even mentioning Viridian's capabilities. Dinners with Camilla and her team, not to talk business, but to understand their culture. Learning that their CEO collected first edition books, that their CFO had a daughter at Juilliard, that their board still held some members from the founding families who valued tradition over innovation. When we'd finally begun formal negotiations, I'd crafted every element to their sensibilities. No PowerPoints full of buzzwords and disruption rhetoric. Instead, leather-bound proposals that felt substantial. Meetings in their oak-paneled conference room instead of our chrome and glass spaces. Respect for their 100-year history while gently introducing teeny first-century solutions. The key person clause had been my suggestion, but they'd embraced it immediately. Finally, Camilla had said, "Someone who understands that business is about people, not just processes." My phone rang. Unknown number again. This time, I recognized Sophia Hayes' voice immediately. "Ms. Vance, I'm sorry to bother you, but are you aware that Northwind Group has scheduled an emergency board meeting for tomorrow morning?" I kept my voice neutral. I'm no longer an employee of Viridian. "Ms. Hayes, I wouldn't know about client meetings, but you understand what this is about." Her voice dropped lower, presumably checking that Sterling wasn't nearby. "Legal is in full panic mode. They just realized the contract. I'm sure Viridian's excellent legal team will handle whatever issues arise," I said smoothly. "Is there anything else?" "Mr. Sterling wants to know if you'll take a meeting tomorrow to discuss transition arrangements. Transition arrangements as if 17 years of relationships could be handed over like a box of files, as if trust could be transferred like a software license." "I'm afraid I'm not available tomorrow," I said. "Or the day after." "I'm considering my options. Ms. Vance, please." Her professional facade cracked slightly. "You don't understand. If Northwind Group pulls out, it's not just the revenue. They'll take the framework, the European expansion plans, everything. And there's talk they might convince Keller Systems to follow, and Aura Solutions is asking questions. So, the dominoes were already falling faster than even I had anticipated." "That sounds like Mr. Sterling's problem," I said. "After all, I'm just a relic from the past. I'm sure his fresh perspective will find a solution." After I hung up, I poured another glass of wine and returned to my documentation. The framework Sophia had mentioned that was my baby. Developed over 3 years of trial and error across dozens of projects. Viridian had been planning to package it, sell it as a proprietary methodology. But I'd been clever in the contract language. The intellectual property rights were tied to the partnership, not the company. If Northwind Group walked, they could take it with them, and I'd made sure my name was all over the development documentation. By 6:45 p.m., as the sun set over Westchester, I'd filled 20 pages with details, connections, relationships that couldn't be captured in any corporate database, the personal cell phone numbers earned through years of trust, the understanding of each client's unspoken concerns, their internal politics, their real decision-makers versus their figureheads, the knowledge of who golfed together, whose kids went to the same schools, who had grudges dating back to failed mergers in the 90s. Victor Sterling thought business was about spreadsheets and disruption, about clearing out the old to make way for the new. He was about to learn that in the relationship economy, you couldn't just delete the past. It had tentacles, connections, dependencies that ran deeper than any org chart could show. My laptop chimed again. This time, it was a text from Camilla Reed. Board meeting scheduled for 8 a.m. tomorrow. We'll be invoking Section 47B unless something changes dramatically. I'm sorry it's come to this. Elara, you deserved better. I raised my glass to the empty kitchen, toasting the ghost of the career that had died that morning. Tomorrow, Victor Sterling would wake up to a crisis he'd created with 5 minutes of arrogance. Sophia Hayes would burst into his office with news that would shatter his carefully planned revolution. The boy king would discover that his kingdom had been built on foundations he'd just demolished, and I would be here in my expensive house, finally watching the sunrise with nowhere else to be. Vindication tasted like good wine, and the quiet satisfaction of knowing that some contracts were written in more than ink. They were written in trust, sealed with loyalty, and witnessed by 17 years of showing up when it mattered. Sterling had broken the first contract when he dismissed me in that marble lobby. Tomorrow he'd learn about the second one. I woke at 5:30 a.m. on Wednesday. Not from an alarm, but from habit. 17 years of early mornings don't disappear overnight. The difference was the silence. No emails demanding immediate attention. No calendar alerts for 7 a.m. calls with Singapore. No mental inventory of fires that needed fighting before most people had their first coffee. I made breakfast for the first time in years. Real breakfast. Eggs Benedict with Hollands from scratch. Not a protein bar grabbed while rushing to the car. The morning news droned in the background, full of market updates I no longer needed to care about. Strange how freedom could feel so much like vertigo. At exactly 8:02 a.m., my phone exploded. The first call was from Samuel Green, Viridian's chief legal officer. I let it go to voicemail. The second was from someone in HR, then accounting, then a number I didn't recognize with a Viridian extension. By 8:15 a.m., I had 12 missed calls and 23 text messages, each more frantic than the last. I selected Sophia Hayes' text to read, Emergency NKG invoked clause. Legal says only you can fix this. Sterling is ballistic. Please call ASAP. Then Camilla Reed. Board voted unanimously. Contract suspended pending resolution of key person clause. We're prepared to move forward with Axel and partners, unless Viridian can remedy within 48 hours. I tried to buy you more time, but the board is firm. Axel and partners, our biggest competitor, who'd been circling Northwind Group for years. Camilla was playing hardball, and she'd just shown her cards. This wasn't just about pulling out. It was about taking everything we'd built and handing it to our rivals. My doorbell rang at 8:27 a.m. Through the security camera, I saw Sophia Hayes standing on my porch, immaculate in her Armani suit despite the early hour, clutching a leather portfolio like a life preserver. I took my time finishing my coffee before answering. She looked like she'd aged 5 years overnight. Ms. Vance, she began before I'd fully opened the door. Thank you for seeing me. I know this is irregular, but I didn't agree to see you, I interrupted calmly. You're at my home uninvited at 8:30 in the morning. Her composure cracked slightly. I'm sorry, but this couldn't wait. Mr. Sterling sent me to Mr. Sterling sent you. I laughed short and sharp. The same Mr. Sterling, who couldn't be bothered to speak to me directly yesterday, who had security escort me out like a criminal. She flushed but pressed on. The Northwind Group situation is critical. They're claiming breach of contract based on your termination. Legal has reviewed the key person clause and she swallowed hard. We need you to come back immediately. I stepped aside, gesturing for her to enter, not out of kindness, but because I wanted her to see what she was asking me to leave. The beautiful home I'd barely lived in. The life I'd sacrificed for a company that had discarded me like old furniture. She followed me to the kitchen, her heels clicking on the hardwood floors. I didn't offer coffee. The company needs you. She tried again, setting her portfolio on my granite counter. Mr. Sterling has authorized me to make you an offer. Full reinstatement, a formal apology, a 20% raise. Stop. I held up a hand. Sophia, may I call you Sophia? Let me explain something. Yesterday morning, I was publicly humiliated in front of my colleagues. 17 years of service dismissed as redundancy. My entire career reduced to a line item on someone's reorganization chart. She opened her mouth, but I continued. Now, because of a contract clause, Mr. Sterling didn't bother to read because of relationships he didn't bother to understand. Suddenly, I'm valuable again. That's not how this works. What do you want? She asked desperately. Name your terms. I walked to the window, watching the morning sun paint my neglected garden gold. What did I want? Yesterday, I'd wanted revenge. Today, standing in my kitchen with nowhere to rush to, I wanted something more complex. I want Mr. Sterling to understand what he almost destroyed, I said finally. Not just a contract or revenue stream, a network of trust that took years to build. I want him to come here himself, not send emissaries, and I want any return to be on my terms, not his. Sophia fumbled with her portfolio, pulling out documents. He anticipated you might say that he's prepared too. My phone rang, cutting her off. The caller ID made me smile. George Keller. I need to take this, I said, answering on speaker so Sophia could hear. Good morning, George. Alara, thank God. George's voice filled my kitchen. I just got off the phone with Camilla Reed. She told me what happened. Northwind Group is invoking their key person clause, and she strongly suggested we might want to review our own contracts with Viridian. Sophia's face went white. I see, I said carefully. And what are your thoughts on that? My thoughts, George laughed bitterly. My thoughts are that any company stupid enough to fire Alara Vance doesn't deserve my business. We're scheduling a board meeting for tomorrow to discuss our options. I wanted to give you a heads up. If you're no longer with Viridian, we'll be reaching out to you directly about future partnerships. I appreciate that. George, I'm currently evaluating my options. Well, evaluate fast. Camilla mentioned Axel and Partners is already preparing a proposal for Northwind Group. If you're free agency, Alara, there's going to be a bidding war. After I hung up, Sophia sank into one of my bar stools. Keller Systems, too. Relationships matter, I said simply. Your boss thought he was clearing out Deadwood. He never bothered to check what was holding up the roof. She pushed the documents toward me with shaking hands. Please just look at the offer. The company can't afford to lose both contracts, and if Aura Solutions follow suit. Aura. Now that was interesting. I hadn't heard from Rajkumar yet. Have they indicated concerns? Their legal team requested a copy of all key person clauses in active contracts this morning. Sophia looked ready to cry. It says the request came in at 6:47 a.m. Mumbai time. Someone tipped them off. The network was activating even faster than I had anticipated. The business world was small at the top, and news traveled at the speed of worry. By lunch, every major client would be reviewing their contracts, looking for escape clauses, wondering if Viridian was still the partner they'd signed with. Mr. Sterling needs to understand, I said slowly. that this isn't a negotiation about my job. It's a negotiation about Viridian's survival. 20% of the company's revenue is tied to contracts with my name on them. Another 30% comes from relationships I've built. You can't just plug someone else into those equations. Then what do you propose? Sophia asked desperately. He'll agree to almost anything at this point. Almost anything, but not everything. Not the one thing that mattered? Genuine recognition of value before crisis forced his hand. Tell Mr. Sterling I'll meet with him, I said finally. Tomorrow morning, 10 a.m., not at Viridian, Neutral Ground, the Harvard Club, main dining room. He comes alone. No entourage, no power plays. And Sophia, make sure he understands this isn't me coming to him. This is him coming to me. She gathered her documents hastily, relief and fear warring on her face. Thank you. Thank you. I'll tell him immediately. As I walked her to the door, she paused. Ms. Vance, yesterday when he fired you, I wanted to say something. We all did, but we were afraid. I know, I said quietly. That's the culture he wants to build. Fear over loyalty, disruption over continuity. Well, he's about to learn what happens when you disrupt the wrong things. After she left, I stood in my doorway, watching her Mercedes speed down my tree-lined street somewhere in Manhattan. Victor Sterling was learning that power was more complex than he'd imagined, that you couldn't simply walk into an ecosystem and declare yourself apex predator without understanding the food chain. My phone buzzed with a text from Camilla. Heard you might be back in play. If not, Axel and Partners very interested in someone with your experience. Just saying. The sun climbed higher, warming my face. For the first time in 17 years, I had leverage. Real leverage. Not just the promise of continued good service. The question now wasn't whether I'd return to Viridian. It was what price I'd extract for saving what Victor Sterling had nearly destroyed, and whether any price could compensate for the moment when he'd looked at me like I was nothing in front of everyone who'd watched me build what he'd inherited. The answer would come tomorrow at 10 a.m., sharp, overpriced eggs at the Harvard Club. But first, he'd have to walk through that door, pride in hand, and ask for help from the relic he'd thrown away. I smiled, closing my door on the morning chaos. Sometimes the best revenge wasn't planned. Sometimes it just required patience while arrogant men discovered the weight of their mistakes. My phone started ringing at 6 a.m., Thursday morning. Not one call, but a symphony of desperation orchestrated by the collapse of corporate hubris. I let them all go to voicemail while I sipped my coffee and watched the sunrise paint my garden in shades of gold and possibility. The voicemail transcripts read like a corporate thriller. Samuel Green from Legal. His usually pompous voice cracked with stress. Alara, this is beyond critical. Aura Solutions is threatening immediate contract termination. They're citing breach of good faith. Please, we need to discuss options. Then CFO Victoria Stone. Vance, I've run the numbers. If NKG and Keller Systems pull out, we're looking at a 40% revenue hit. The board is meeting an emergency session at 8. Call me. But the most interesting message came from someone unexpected. Thomas Northwind III, patriarch of the Northwind family and honorary chairman of Northwind Group. I'd met him only twice, both times at charity galas where he'd held court like corporate royalty. His message was brief. Ms. Vance, I believe we should speak directly. My private number is attached. The situation has become complicated. I called him back immediately. Alara, he answered on the first ring, his voice carrying the weight of old money and older wisdom. Thank you for returning my call. I'm afraid there's been some rather unfortunate developments overnight. Good morning, Mr. Northwind. What kind of developments? Victor Sterling called Camilla yesterday afternoon, tried to convince her that Viridian had adequate personnel to maintain service levels without you. He paused, and I could picture him in his study surrounded by first editions and disappointment. He actually suggested your assistant could take over the account. My assistant? I almost laughed. Diana is brilliant, but she's been with the company 8 months. She doesn't even have full security clearance for your data systems yet. Precisely what Camilla told him rather forcefully. I understand. His dry chuckle carried across the line. But that's not why I'm calling. Axel and partners reached out to us last night. They've offered to not only match Viridian's contract terms, but to bring on what they called proven leadership from the industry. They weren't subtle about meaning you. So Axel was already making moves. I'd wondered how long it would take them to smell blood in the water. I haven't spoken to Axel and partners, I said carefully. I know. That's what concerns me, Alara. They're betting on acquiring you to acquire us. Meanwhile, your Mr. Sterling seems to believe this is all a negotiating tactic. He actually accused Camilla of manufacturing a crisis to renegotiate rates. Now, I did laugh short and sharp. He accused Camilla Reed of lying Camilla, who still has the first $1 Northwind Group ever earned framed in her office. It did not go over well, Thomas confirmed. Which brings me to my point. The board has given Viridian 48 hours to resolve the key person clause. That deadline expires tomorrow at noon. But I wanted you to know that regardless of what happens with Viridian, Northwind Group values the relationship we've built with you personally. If circumstances were to change regarding your employment situation, he let the implication hang in the air like expensive perfume. One of the most prestigious firms in America was essentially offering me a blank check to bring them with me wherever I landed. I appreciate that, Mr. Northwind. More than you know, I'm meeting with Sterling this morning to discuss the situation. Are you? His tone sharpened with interest. May I offer some unsolicited advice? I've seen many young executives like Mr. Sterling. They mistake motion for progress, volume for authority. They believe that clearing the board gives them fresh moves, not realizing that in business, as in chess, you need your pieces to win. After we hung up, I showered and dressed with more care than I had in years, not the armor of corporate conformity. Those days were over. Instead, I chose a deep burgundy dress that Arthur had loved, the one that made me look like I owned the world. Pearls that had been my grandmother's. The Cartier watch I'd bought myself after closing the Aura deal. If Victor Sterling wanted to negotiate with the woman he'd dismissed, he'd get her at full power. The Harvard Club at 9:50 a.m. was a tableau of old-world authority, dark wood, leather chairs that had held the weight of 1,000 handshakes, portraits of men who'd built empires before email existed. I chose a table by the window, ordered coffee, and waited. Sterling arrived at 10:07 a.m., and I could tell the delay was killing him. He tried to make an entrance, power move number 1 in the corporate playbook, but I didn't look up from my phone where I was responding to Aura's legal team. Let him stand there in his $2,000 suit, waiting for the attention he denied me. Ms. Vance, he finally said, pulling out the chair across from me. I finished typing, sent the message, then looked up with a pleasant smile. Mr. Sterling, thank you for coming. He looked different than he had on Tuesday. The sharp edges were still there, but stress had drawn lines around his eyes. His Tom Ford suit was impeccable, but his hands betrayed him. A slight tremor as he reached for the water glass. Let's cut to the chase, he began, trying to regain control. The company needs you back. I'm prepared to offer. No, I interrupted softly. That's not how this works. You don't get to set the terms anymore. You forfeited that right when you had security escort me out like a criminal." His jaw tightened. That was perhaps hasty. Hasty? I laughed, drawing glances from nearby tables. You destroyed 17 years of work in 5 minutes. You humiliated me in front of people I'd mentored, people who respected me. And you did it to prove a point, to mark your territory. How's that working out for you? You know exactly how it's working out, he snapped, then visibly forced himself to calm down. Look, I made a mistake. I admitted I didn't understand the full scope of your relationships with our clients. No, I corrected. You didn't bother to understand. There's a difference. You walked in assuming everyone from the previous regime was expendable. That experience was weakness. That loyalty was complacency. The waiter approached, but I waved him off. This wasn't about dining. This was about watching Victor Sterling eat crow in the most exclusive club in Manhattan. "What do you want?" he asked finally. The words seemingly dragged from him. "Name your price. The board has authorized me to do whatever it takes." I pulled out my journal, the same one I'd written in after he'd fired me. "Let me tell you what's happened since Tuesday morning. Northwind Group activated their key person clause. Keller Systems is reconsidering their partnership. Aura Solutions is reviewing all contracts for similar provisions. 3 other major accounts have made discreet inquiries about the stability of their relationships." His face palled with each name. "But that's just the immediate damage." I continued. "Axel and Partners has already approached 2 of our clients. Morrison Partners is circling Aura. Every competitor smells blood. And why shouldn't they? The new CEO just proved he doesn't understand his own business. So what's your solution?" His arrogance cracked, revealing something almost human underneath. "You clearly have one, or we wouldn't be here." I leaned back, letting him twist in the silence. "I'll return to Viridian, but not as project director. I want Executive Vice President of Client Relations reporting directly to the board, not to you. I want veto power over any terminations in my division. I want my name on the building directory, and I want a public statement acknowledging that my termination was an error in judgment." "That's ridiculous," he started, then caught himself. "The board won't agree to undermining the CEO's authority." "The board will agree to whatever saves 40% of their revenue," I countered. "And let's be clear, this isn't about undermining you. It's about protecting the company from you, from any CEO who thinks they can rule by fear instead of respect." My phone buzzed. "Camilla Reed. Perfect timing. Axel and Partners presenting at 2 p.m. today. Board wants resolution before then." I showed him the screen. 4 hours, Mr. Sterling. In 4 hours, Northwind Group hears Axel and Partners' pitch. Once that happens, momentum shifts. Other clients will follow. The exodus begins. "This is extortion," he said quietly. "No," I replied. "This is consequence. You wanted to play corporate dictator. You wanted to clear the board without understanding the game. Well, congratulations. You cleared it so well that all the pieces went to your opponent." He stared at me for a long moment, and I saw him recalculating not just the immediate crisis, but everything. His assumptions about power, about value, about what made a company strong, it was like watching a chess computer realize it had been playing checkers. "If I agree to your terms," he said slowly, "can you guarantee the contracts stay in place?" "I can guarantee I'll make the calls," I said. "Whether they listen depends on how convincing we both are about Viridian's new commitment to stability and relationships." "We," he caught the pronoun. "You'd work with me after what I did. I'll work for the company I helped build. I corrected for the people who still believe in what we created. You're just another CEO. Mr. Sterling, I've outlasted 4. I'll outlast you too if necessary. The brutality of that truth hung between us like a blade. He'd thought Tuesday was about him asserting dominance. Now he understood it had been the beginning of a lesson in what real power looked like. Not the power to fire, but the power to build something firing couldn't destroy. I need to make some calls, he said finally. The board will want to discuss. You have 3 hours and 45 minutes, I reminded him. I'll be here until 11. After that, I have a lunch appointment. I didn't mention the appointment was with Axel's CEO. Let him wonder. As he stood to leave, something shifted in his expression. You planned this, he said, the key person clause. You knew something like this might happen. I planned for the possibility that someone might not recognize my value. I admitted it wasn't personal. It was just good business. The same good business you should have investigated before making dramatic gestures. He left without another word, his Tom Ford suit disappearing into the Harvard Club's shadows. I signaled the waiter, finally ready for that breakfast. Whatever happened next, I'd already won. Not because I'd orchestrated some elaborate revenge, but because I'd simply been who I'd always been. Someone who understood that in business, relationships weren't soft skills. They were the only skills that mattered when the contracts came due. By 10:45 a.m., the Harvard Club dining room had become my war room. 3 phones lay on the starch tablecloth. My personal cell, the backup I used for international clients, and a new one I'd activated just for this circus. They lit up in rotation like a corporate emergency system. The first call I took was from Victoria Stone, the CFO. Alara, thank God you're answering. The board just went into emergency session. Sterling presented your terms, and there's blood in the water. Half the board wants to accept immediately. The other half is screaming about setting precedents, undermining CEO authority. She lowered her voice. But Frederick Quinn himself just walked in. The old man hasn't attended a board meeting in 3 years. Frederick Quinn, the founder's grandson, who turned his family's small manufacturing firm into a multinational corporation. He'd hired me fresh from Columbia. Seen something in the hungry girl from Newark. I'd thought he'd forgotten I existed. What's his temperature? I asked. Volcanic. He asked Sterling one question. How do you fire someone without reading their contracts first? Sterling couldn't answer. My second phone buzzed. Camilla Reed. Axel moved their presentation to noon. They know something. What's your status? I typed back quickly in negotiations. Hold tight. The waiter refilled my coffee for the 3rd time, discreetly, not commenting on my commandeering their best table into a crisis center. This was the Harvard Club. They'd seen billion-dollar deals made and destroyed over Eggs Benedict. At 10:58 a.m., Samuel Green from legal called. Alara, I'm sending you something. Check your email now. The attachment was a board resolution drafted in legalese, but clear in intent. Everything I'd asked for, plus something I hadn't a seat on the board itself, pending shareholder approval at the next quarterly meeting. They weren't just bringing me back. They were armoring me against any future Victor Sterlings. This is Frederick's doing, Samuel explained. He overrode the objections. Said anyone who could cost the company 40% of revenue by walking out the door deserved a seat at the table where such decisions were made. And Sterling signed it. No choice. Frederick made it clear. This or start packing. I stared at the document on my phone screen. Executive Vice President of Client Relations. Board observer status progressing to full member. Salary that would make my mother faint, and most importantly, autonomy to protect what I'd built from anyone who didn't understand its value. I need one more thing, I said. The public statement, not some buried press release. I want Sterling to send an all-staff email today acknowledging the error and announcing my new position. Alara, those are my terms. Samuel, that email goes out. I make my calls, contracts stay in place. Otherwise, I take lunch with Axel and partners and we see what happens. I'll make it happen, he promised. How soon can you start damage control? The moment I see that email, I hung up and immediately dialed Camilla Reed. Camilla, it's Alara. I have news. Please tell me it's good news. Axel just arrived in our lobby. They brought a full team. Viridian has met my terms. I'm returning as EVP of Client Relations with full autonomy over our partnership. The CEO has acknowledged that my termination was an error. Silence for a moment then. Is this real, Alara? Because I've got a room full of board members ready to jump ship. It's real. I'm looking at the signed resolution right now. Camilla, you know me. You know what I've built. Give me 6 months to show you that Viridian is still the partner you chose. 6 months, she agreed. But Alara, this can't happen again. We can't have this kind of instability. It won't. I'll make sure of it. The next call was to George Keller, then Aura Solutions, then the dozen other clients who'd been circling like worried sharks. Each conversation was a delicate dance, acknowledging their concerns, assuring stability, recommitting to partnerships built on trust rather than contracts. By 11:45 a.m., I'd pulled most of them back from the ledge. Northwind Group postponed Axel and Partners' presentation indefinitely. Keller Systems confirmed their continued partnership. Aura Solutions not only stayed, but inquired about additional services. The bleeding had stopped. The ship had steadied. At exactly 5 p.m., Victor Sterling knocked on my conference room door. "Come in," I called without looking up from my screens. He entered like a man walking into a courtroom where he was both defendant and prosecutor. The arrogance from Tuesday was gone, replaced by something more complex. Not quite humility, but perhaps its cousin awareness. "Alara," he began, then paused. "Ms. Vance, thank you for seeing me." I finally looked at him directly. The Tom Ford suit was still impeccable, but the man wearing it had been diminished. Good. Some lessons required diminishment to stick. "Sit," I said, gesturing to a chair across from my command center. "We need to discuss how this is going to work." He sat carefully like the chair might be rigged with explosives. "I want to apologize again." "I don't need apologies." I cut him off. "I need understanding. Do you know why you almost destroyed this company, Mr. Sterling?" His jaw tightened at the blunt assessment. "I made assumptions about redundancy in the organization." "No." I leaned back, studying him. "You confused disruption with destruction. You thought that clearing the board meant starting fresh. But business isn't chess, Mr. Sterling. It's gardening. You don't create a new garden by ripping out all the plants. You cultivate what's there. Prune carefully, plant thoughtfully." "I see that now," he said quietly. "Do you?" I pulled up my client roster on the main screen. Every name on this list represents years of cultivation. Late nights earning trust, early mornings solving problems, weekends spent understanding their business better than they understand it themselves. You can't replace that with an org chart reorganization. "What do you want from me?" The question seemed to cost him something to ask. "I want you to learn," I said simply. "Before you make any major decision, I want you to ask yourself, what am I destroying to create this? Is the destruction necessary, or is it just dramatic? Are you solving a problem or creating one to solve?" He nodded slowly. "The board has made it clear that all significant personnel decisions now require your input." "Not my input," I corrected. "My approval for any client F-facing role, That's non-negotiable. Understood. He shifted in his chair. I've also been instructed to work with you on a comprehensive review of all strategic initiatives. Frederick Quinn was quite specific about the need for collaboration. Frederick, the old lion, still had teeth when needed. We'll start Monday, I said. Weekly meetings, you and me. We'll review every account, every relationship, every vulnerability. You'll learn this business the way it actually works, not the way it looks on a PowerPoint. I'd appreciate that, he said, and seemed to mean it. Then, with visible effort, you could have destroyed me today, taken your clients, and walked. Why didn't you? I considered the question. Why hadn't I, Axel and partners, had offered essentially a blank check? Other firms had already reached out. I could have turned Tuesday's humiliation into Thursday's bidding war, because I didn't spend 17 years building something just to watch it burn, I said finally. Viridian Corp is bigger than your ego or my pride. It's 4,000 employees who don't deserve to suffer because you made a stupid decision. It's partnerships that create value beyond our walls. It's something worth saving, even from its own CEO. He flinched at that, but took it. What choice did he have? There's something else, he said, reaching into his jacket. He pulled out a small velvet box and set it on the table between us. Frederick asked me to give you this. Inside was a pin, the original Viridian Corp logo from 1952, done in gold and diamonds. I'd seen it only in photos, worn by the founder himself. It was the company's equivalent of a Medal of Honor. He said, You earned this on Tuesday, Sterling continued, when you chose to protect the company rather than simply profit from its mistakes. I picked up the pin, feeling its weight. Such a small thing to represent such a large principle. I'll wear it Monday, I said. When we start rebuilding what you almost tore down. He stood to leave, then paused at the door. For what it's worth, Ms. Vance, I am sorry. Not just for the termination, but for the disrespect for not seeing what was right in front of me. Apology accepted, I said. Now go. I have 3 more calls with European partners. Your little stunt scared them too, and it's going to take more than a pin to fix that. After he left, I sat in my conference room command center, surrounded by the technology that connected me to relationships around the world. Each screen showed a different aspect of the empire I'd built through years of showing up, following through, and caring more than was strictly necessary. Tuesday morning, I'd been fired in front of everyone, dismissed as a relic. Thursday evening, I was executive vice president with a board seat in my future, and the CEO coming to me for permission to run his own company. The moral of the story wasn't about revenge or vindication. It was simpler than that. Value isn't assigned by titles or charts. It's earned through irreplaceable connections, through being the person people trust when trust matters, through building something so essential that removing it threatens the whole structure. Victor Sterling had learned that lesson the hard way. I pinned Frederick's gift to my jacket and got back to work. There were still calls to make, relationships to shore up, a company to stabilize. The revolution was over before it began. Stopped not by corporate politics or boardroom maneuvering, but by the simple power of being indispensable. And if that wasn't the best revenge, I didn't know what was. Monday morning arrived like a promised reckoning. I walked into Viridian Corp at 7 a.m. sharp, wearing my grandmother's pearls and Frederick's golden pin-like armor. The 38th floor had transformed over the weekend. My corner office gleamed with fresh paint and new furniture. The nameplate reading Elara Vance, Executive Vice President, in letters that caught the morning light. But I wasn't there to admire interior decorating. Diana, my former assistant, now promoted to senior account manager, met me with coffee in a concerned expression. "We have a problem," she said without preamble. "It found something during the weekend systems audit. There are discrepancies in the Northwind Group contract files." "What kind of discrepancies?" "Someone accessed the payment terms section last Tuesday night after you were after the termination. The modification timestamps show changes to the fee structure." I sat down my coffee carefully. "Show me." In my office, Diana pulled up the file history on my monitor. There it was. At 11:47 p.m. on Tuesday, someone had altered the payment schedule, inflating our fees by 15% and hiding it in subsection amendments. The digital signature showed administrator access, but the specific user ID was scrambled. "Who has admin access to contract files?" I asked, though I suspected the answer. "Suite executives and their designated assistants," Diana replied. "Legal flagged it during the compliance review you ordered. They're quietly freaking out." My phone rang. Samuel Green from Legal. Right on cue. "Alara, we need to talk. Can you come to the legal floor?" "Bring Diana. Tell no one else." The legal department occupied the entire 35th floor, a maze of serious people with serious expressions. This morning, those expressions had graduated to grim. Samuel met us at the elevator with 2 other senior counsels and ushered us into a secure conference room. "We found more," he said without preamble, sliding a folder across the table. 3 contracts total: Northwind Group, Keller Systems, and Aura Solutions, all modified after hours on Tuesday, all showing inflated payment terms that were never agreed to. I opened the folder, scanning the evidence. Someone had been clever, but not quite clever enough. The modifications were subtle. A percentage here, a fee structure there, designed to look like normal amendments. But I knew these contracts like my own signature. Every deviation screamed sabotage. If these had gone through, Samuel continued, if the clients had received invoices based on these numbers, they'd have terminated for breach, I finished, immediately, no cure period. It would have validated every concern about Viridian's stability. Exactly. Someone wanted to ensure the contracts failed even if you came back. Diana leaned forward. The timestamps are all from Sterling's floor, the executive level, but not necessarily Sterling himself. I pointed out anyone with access to an executive terminal could have done this. Security logs conveniently corrupted for that time period. Another lawyer replied, "Professional job. Someone who knew our systems." I thought back to Tuesday night, imagining the executive floor in darkness. Who would have had access? Who would have had motive? Sterling himself seemed too obvious. Why create evidence of fraud when he'd already won his power play? "I need to see Sophia Hayes," I said suddenly. Sterling's secretary, Samuel frowned. "Why?" "Because she was the one who looked scared on Tuesday, and she was the one who came to my house Wednesday morning, already knowing about the Northwind Group situation before it should have been public." 30 minutes later, Sophia sat across from me in a different conference room. This one wired for recording with legal's permission. She looked exhausted, her usually perfect appearance showing cracks. "I didn't know what he was planning," she said before I could even ask. "Tuesday night, he asked me to stay late, said we needed to review all major contracts, understand the portfolio. I gave him my access codes because he said his weren't working yet." "Who is he, Sophia?" I asked gently. Her hands trembled. Richard Axel from Axel and Partners. He was there in Sterling's office. They were celebrating. The pieces clicked into place with sickening clarity. Sterling didn't just want to fire me. He wanted to destroy the relationships permanently. Richard said it was insurance. Sophia continued, tears forming. that even if you came back, the contracts would implode when clients saw the altered terms. Then Axel and partners could sweep in, offer to honor the original pricing, look like heroes, and Sterling would get kickbacks for delivering distressed clients. I finished. Classic corporate raid dressed up as executive transition. Sophia nodded miserably. I didn't understand until Wednesday morning when Northwind Group called about the clause. Then I checked the files and saw the changes. I tried to fix them, but I didn't have the right access anymore. Why didn't you say something then? Because Richard made it clear what happens to people who cross him. And I have 2 kids. Ms. Vance, I couldn't. But then you came back and I thought maybe I studied her for a long moment. Sophia Hayes caught between power brokers trying to survive in a game she'd never asked to play. How many corporate casualties started exactly like this? You're going to legal, I said firmly. You're going to tell them everything, every conversation, every detail. In exchange, you'll receive full whistleblower protection and a transfer to any department you choose, away from the executive floor. What about Sterling? Leave Sterling to me. Back in my office, I convened a war council. Samuel Green, Victoria Stone from Finance, Diana, and 2 board members who happened to be in the building. We laid out the evidence like prosecutors building a case. It's conspiracy to commit corporate fraud, Samuel summarized. Sabotage, tortious interference with business relationships. Take your pick of charges. Can we prove Sterling knew? Board member Harrison asked. Sophia's testimony puts Axel in his office. The access came from his terminal. Either he knew or he's too incompetent to notice someone committing fraud under his nose. Neither option works well for a CEO. What do you want to do? Alara Margaret asked. I looked at the evidence spread across my conference table. Photos of altered contracts, system logs, Sophia's preliminary statement, a clear pattern of corporate malfeasance that would destroy Sterling, probably land him in jail, certainly end his career. Tuesday, he'd humiliated me in front of everyone. Thursday, I'd saved him from his own stupidity. Monday, I held his future in a manila folder. Set up a board meeting, I said finally. Emergency session, 1 hour. The boardroom at 11 a.m. was a study in controlled panic. All 12 board members were present, either in person or on screens. Frederick Quinn held court at the head of the table, his weathered face giving away nothing. Sterling entered last, still projecting confidence despite the summons. That confidence evaporated when he saw me standing at the presentation screen with Samuel Green. Board members, I began without preamble. We've discovered an attempt to sabotage our major client contracts through fraudulent modification of payment terms. The evidence points to a conspiracy between external parties and someone with executive access. I walk them through it methodically. The timeline, the alterations, Sophia's testimony via recorded statement, the connection to Axel and partners. With each slide, Sterling's face grew paler. I had no knowledge of this, he said when I finished. If Axel accessed my system, then you're negligent, Frederick Quinn interrupted, his voice cutting like a blade. You gave a competitor access to our most sensitive contracts. Whether through malice or incompetence, the result is the same. I demand an investigation. Oh, you'll get one. Board member Harrison promised. Legal, regulatory, probably criminal. The only question is whether you're still CEO while it happens. I watched Sterling realize his position. The golden boy who'd walked in Tuesday, ready to revolutionize everything, reduced to bargaining for survival by Monday. There was poetry in it, but no satisfaction, just the weary recognition of another executive who'd confused power with wisdom. There's another option, I said quietly. Every head turned to me. Mr. Sterling resigns immediately. Full cooperation with all investigations, no golden parachute, no sealed records. In exchange, we handle this internally. No criminal charges if the investigation confirms he was Axel's dupe rather than co-conspirator. Axel and Partners gets reported to regulatory bodies for attempted corporate sabotage. Our clients never have to know how close their contracts came to being weaponized. "You're saving him," Frederick observed. "After what he did to you, I'm saving Viridian," I corrected. "A criminal investigation makes headlines. Headlines spook clients. Spooked clients consider competitors. We just spent 5 days stopping that bleeding. Why reopen the wound?" The board deliberated for exactly 12 minutes. Sterling's resignation letter was signed by noon. His personal items were packed within an hour. By 2 p.m., Victor Sterling had disappeared from Viridian Corp as suddenly as he'd arrived, leaving only a cautionary tale about the dangers of arrogance and the cost of underestimating the people who actually run the company. Sophia Hayes transferred to marketing, where her attention to detail would be appreciated without the political pressure. Axel and Partners found themselves under investigation by 3 different regulatory bodies. The contracts were quietly restored to their original terms with no client ever knowing they'd been tampered with, and I settled into my new office, finally able to focus on building rather than defending. Diana knocked at 4 p.m., the Journal's online one. They want a statement about Sterling's sudden departure. "Tell them Viridian Corp wishes Mr. Sterling well in his future endeavors," I said. "And that under new leadership, we're more committed than ever to the relationships that define our success." She grinned. "New leadership, meaning you, interim CEO," I confirmed, holding up the board resolution that had arrived an hour ago. "Until they find someone permanent. Someone who understands that you can't rule through fear when your kingdom runs on trust." The emergency board meeting stretched through Monday afternoon like a corporate tribunal. I stood at the presentation screen, evidence laid out with prosecutorial precision, watching the 12 faces that would decide not just Victor Sterling's fate, but the future direction of Viridian Corp. "The scope goes deeper than the contract alterations," Samuel Green added, pulling up additional files. "We found communications between Axel and Partners and 3 other senior managers Sterling brought in. They were planning a systematic raid of our client base. Board member Victoria Ashford, who'd run 2 Fortune 500 companies before retiring to board service, leaned forward. This wasn't just about firing Alara. This was corporate espionage. Allegedly, Sterling's lawyer interjected. He'd arrived 15 minutes into the meeting, summoned by his client's desperate text messages. Mr. Sterling maintains he had no knowledge of any modifications to contracts. Then he's either complicit or incompetent. Frederick Quinn stated flatly. Neither quality belongs in a CEO chair. I clicked to the next slide. Sophia's recorded testimony, transaction logs, the digital trail that led directly to Sterling's executive access codes. The lawyer's face fell with each revelation. His client had hired him for a wrongful termination defense. He was looking at criminal conspiracy charges. We need to consider the broader implications. Victoria Stone said, if this goes public, if our clients learn their contracts were tampered with, stock price drops 20% minimum. Harrison finished. Consumer confidence evaporates. Competitors circle like vultures. Which is why, I said, moving to my final slide. I recommend we handle this surgically. The terms were simple. Mr. Sterling resigns immediately, forfeits all compensation, including unvested stock options, and cooperates fully with an internal investigation. In exchange, we keep the criminal aspects quiet, protecting both the company's reputation and, ironically, the man who tried to destroy it. "You're letting him off easy," Victoria observed. "I'm being practical," I countered. "A public scandal helps no one. Our clients need stability, not headlines. Our employees need leadership, not a circular firing squad." Sterling sat silently through the deliberation, his 1,000-fountain pen motionless in his hand. The man who'd strutted into Viridian like a conquering hero now looked like what he was, a failed corporate raider caught in his own trap. The vote was unanimous resignation, effective immediately. "There's one more matter," Frederick said as Sterling signed his resignation letter with a shaking hand. "The question of interim leadership." I started to gather my materials, assuming they'd need privacy to discuss succession. Frederick's voice stopped me. "Sit down, Ilera. This concerns you." The boardroom screen lit up with a new presentation, one I hadn't prepared. My employment history at Viridian, client satisfaction scores, revenue generated, crisis managed, 17 years condensed into metrics that told a story of consistent, exceptional performance. "We've been discussing this since Thursday," Frederick continued. "The events of last week demonstrated something crucial. Viridian Corp doesn't need a revolutionary. It needs someone who understands that our greatest asset isn't innovation or disruption. It's trust." Victoria picked up the thread. "You saved 40% of our revenue in 5 days. You exposed a conspiracy that could have destroyed us. More importantly, you did it while protecting the company's reputation." "What are you saying?" I asked, though I suspected the answer. "We're offering you the position of CEO," Frederick said simply. "Not interim, not acting chief executive officer of Viridian Corp." The room went silent except for the hum of ventilation and the distant sounds of Manhattan 38 floors below. Sterling had already been escorted out, leaving only board members and the future they were offering me. "I'm 44 years old," I said finally. "I've never run a company this size." "You've been running the parts that matter for years," Harris countered. "The relationships, the trust, the real business under the spreadsheets. Everything else can be learned." "Take the night to think about it," Frederick suggested. "But Ilera, we're unanimous on this." Sometimes the best leaders are the ones who never sought power but earned it through service. I left the boardroom at 6:30 p.m., my head spinning with the magnitude of what they'd offered. CEO, the corner office I'd walked past for 17 years, never imagining it could be mine. The responsibility for 4,000 employees, billions in revenue, relationships I'd built, but would now oversee from a different altitude. Diana waited in my office with champagne and Chinese takeout. So she asked, "Do I call you Madam CEO now?" "I haven't accepted yet," I said, sinking into my chair. The sunset painted Manhattan in shades of gold and possibility. "It's a big decision, is it, though?" She poured champagne into coffee mugs. "We hadn't thought to stock proper glasses. You've been doing the job for years. Now they're just giving you the title and the salary to match." My phone buzzed with messages. Camilla Reed. Heard the news. About time. Northwind Group looks forward to working with CEO Vance. George Keller. Frederick called. Couldn't happen to a better person. Dinner Thursday to celebrate. Rajkumar from Mumbai. Most excellent news. Finally, someone who understands business is about relationships. Each message reinforced what Diana had said. I'd been doing the job. The only difference was the nameplate and the accountability that came with it. By 10 p.m., I was alone in my office, staring at the formal offer letter Frederick had sent. The salary was substantial, but not the point. The stock options were generous, but not the motivation. What called to me was the opportunity to prove that a different kind of leadership could work. Not the slash and burn approach of a Victor Sterling, but something built on the foundation of trust and service. I thought about Tuesday morning, walking through those revolving doors with congratulatory flowers, only to be escorted out in humiliation. How Sterling had called me a relic, a remnant of old thinking that needed clearing away. Now his office would be mine. His vision of disruption had ended in disgrace and near disaster. My philosophy of cultivation had saved the company and earned me the throne he'd thought was his by right. I called Frederick at 10:45 p.m., knowing he'd be awake. Old lions rarely slept. "I'll do it," I said simply, "on one condition. Name it. I want to restructure how we think about leadership development. No more hiring CEOs like we're buying luxury cars. All flash. No understanding of what's under the hood. We grow our leaders from within, people who understand our culture, our clients, our values. Done." Frederick agreed immediately. "Anything else?" "The executive floor gets remodeled. No more ivory tower aesthetic. I want it to feel like part of the company, not above it. And the old boardroom table, the one your grandfather commissioned, I want it moved to the client conference room. When partners visit, they should feel the weight of our history, not just our ambition." He chuckled. "You're already thinking like a CEO. When will you announce?" "Tuesday morning. I decided all-hands meeting. I want everyone who watched me get fired to see me take the position properly. No backroom deals, no surprise announcements, transparency from day one." Tuesday arrived crisp and bright, autumn air carrying promise through Manhattan's canyons. I dressed carefully, my best suit, grandmother's pearls, Frederick's golden pin, the armor of a warrior who'd won through patience rather than force. The main auditorium was packed by 8:45 a.m. Every employee who could be there in person had come. Screens showed remote offices around the world, all tuned in to see how this corporate drama would end. I took the stage at exactly 900 a.m. No fanfare, no grand entrance, just a Lara Vance, the woman they'd seen escorted out a week ago, now standing before them as their leader. "Good morning," I began, my voice carrying through the hushed space. "A week ago, I was terminated in our lobby. Today I stand here as your CEO. The journey between those points contains lessons I want to share, because they're not just about me. They're about who we are as a company and who we choose to be going forward." I told them the whole story, the client relationships that had saved us, the contract clause that had been a shield, the fraud that had been exposed, the choice between revenge and restoration. Viridian Corp succeeds not because we're the biggest or the flashiest, I continued. We succeed because when clients trust us with their business, we honor that trust. When employees dedicate their careers to our mission, we value that dedication. When partners choose us over competitors, we prove that choice right every single day. The applause started slowly, building to something that shook the walls. But I wasn't done. "There will be changes," I said when they quieted. "Not disruption for its own sake, but evolution based on our strengths. We'll invest in our people rather than replacing them. We'll deepen relationships rather than chasing transactions. We'll build for the next decade, not the next quarter." Sophia Hayes stood in the middle of the crowd, tears streaming down her face. She started the standing ovation that followed, the woman who'd risked everything to expose the truth, leading the celebration of its outcome. Later, in what was now my office, I stood at the window watching the city that never stopped moving. Diana brought me coffee and the morning's first crisis, a supplier threatening to raise prices, a client concerned about transition stability, the 1,000 small fires that CEOs exist to manage. "Ready for this?" she asked. I thought about the week that had passed, the humiliation that became vindication, the firing that became a coronation, the relic that became the future. "I've been ready for 17 years, I said. I just needed someone to finally notice. The phone rang, Camilla Reed, with a question about expanding our partnership into Asian markets. Then George Keller proposing a joint venture he'd been considering. Then Raj Kumar excited about technology initiatives we could pursue together. Each call reinforced the same truth: relationships were the real infrastructure of business. Trust was the only currency that appreciated over time. And sometimes the best revenge wasn't destroying those who'd wronged you. It was succeeding so completely that their actions became footnotes to your triumph. Victor Sterling had given me the greatest gift possible. He'd shown everyone exactly what happened when you didn't value what you had. Now it was my turn to show them what happened when you did. I picked up the phone and got to work. There was a company to run, relationships to nurture, a future to build on foundations that no ambitious fool could demolish in a morning. The relic had become the cornerstone, and Viridian Corp would be better for it. 6 months later, I stood in the same spot where Victor Sterling had ended my career, the marble lobby of Viridian Corp. But this time, I wasn't carrying congratulatory flowers or wearing the armor of false confidence. I was there to welcome our newest client partner, a Fortune 100 company that had chosen us over 3 larger competitors. The decision was simple. Their CEO, Martha Reeves, told me as we walked toward the elevators, every firm promised innovation and disruption. Only Viridian talked about trust and longevity. In this economy, we need partners who will be there when the shine wears off. The executive floor had transformed under my leadership. Gone were the sterile white walls and chrome fixtures that screamed temporary power. In their place, warm woods and collaborative spaces that invited conversation rather than commanded distance. The old boardroom table, my grandfather-in-law's commission, now anchored the client conference room as I'd requested its century-old oak, a testament to permanence in a world obsessed with disruption. Elara Diana knocked, now my chief of staff. The journal interview is in 15 minutes. They want to discuss the turnaround story. The turnaround story. 6 months ago, Viridian had been hemorrhaging clients, trust, and talent. Today, we'd posted record earnings, expanded into 3 new markets, and been featured in Harvard Business Review as a case study in relationship-driven leadership. The article's author had called our approach revolutionary in its embrace of evolution over revolution. Sophia Hayes, now thriving as our VP of Marketing Communications, had coined our new motto, "Building Tomorrow on the Foundations of Trust." It appeared on every piece of literature, every presentation, every communication, not because some consultant had tested it in focus groups, but because every employee knew it was true. The Wall Street Journal reporter was young, eager, armed with questions about disruption and innovation. How do you compete with firms that promise to revolutionize their clients' businesses? By asking a different question, I replied. Instead of how can we change everything, we ask what's worth preserving and strengthening. Revolution is easy. Any fool with a PowerPoint can promise to transform your business. Evolution, careful, thoughtful, strategic growth. That takes patience and wisdom. But doesn't that make you vulnerable to more aggressive competitors? I smiled, thinking of Axel and partners, now under federal investigation for corporate espionage, of Victor Sterling, who'd found himself unemployable after word spread about his role in the conspiracy, Of all the slash and burn leaders who'd mistaken destruction for progress, last quarter, 92% of our revenue came from clients we've had for over 5 years. I said, our client retention rate is the highest in the industry. We don't need to chase new business aggressively because we don't lose the relationships we have. That's not vulnerability. That's strength. The interview continued, but my mind drifted to the morning's earlier meeting. The board had approved my succession planning initiative. Every senior position would now have 2 identified internal candidates, mentored and developed over years, not hired in haste when crisis hit. We were building a leadership pipeline that would outlast any individual, including me. After the reporter left, I found myself in the quiet of my office, looking at the framed photo on my desk, not of corporate victories or industry awards, but of the Tuesday morning security footage. Me walking out with Ben and Mike, flowers in the trash, dignity intact. Despite the humiliation, Diana had given it to me as a reminder. The worst day of your career became the first day of your real leadership. A knock interrupted my thoughts. Camilla Reed stood in my doorway holding a bottle of champagne. "Celebrating something?" I asked. "Our 5th anniversary?" she said, setting the bottle on my desk. 5 years since Northwind Group signed with Viridian. Also 6 months since a very different kind of anniversary. We opened the champagne using proper flutes this time. The sunset painted Manhattan in familiar golds and roses, the same light that had witnessed my darkest professional moment and brightest triumph. "You know what the best part is?" Camilla mused, watching the city below. Sterling thought he was clearing out Deadwood. Instead, he cleared the path for exactly the leader Viridian needed. There's poetry in that kind of corporate karma. She was right. Every decision Sterling had made in his brief tenure had backfired spectacularly. His imported executives had fled when the conspiracy unraveled. His promised disruptions had nearly destroyed decades of carefully built value. His vision of a leaner, meaner Viridian had given way to one that was stronger because it valued its own strength. My phone buzzed with a text from Frederick Quinn. "Board meeting went well. Unanimous approval for your community investment initiative. Your father would be proud." My father. Frederick knew I'd grown up in Newark, raised by a single dad who'd worked 3 jobs to put me through school. He died the year before I joined Viridian, never seeing what his sacrifice had built. But his lessons lived in every decision I made. Value isn't what you take, Alara. It's what you build that lasts after you're gone. The office grew quiet as evening settled over the city. In 6 months, we'd not only recovered from the Sterling crisis, but emerged stronger. Stock price up 30%. Employee satisfaction at an all-time high. A waiting list of talent wanting to join a company that promised growth through cultivation rather than devastation. But the real victory was smaller and larger than any metric. It was Sophia Hayes finding her voice and value in a role that used her talents. It was the junior analysts who no longer feared arbitrary termination. It was the clients who slept better knowing their partnerships were with people, not positions. I thought about Victor Sterling sometimes. Word was he'd started a consulting firm, promising to help companies optimize their human capital through strategic restructuring. The irony of him selling the very disruption that had destroyed him wasn't lost on anyone who knew the story. At 7:45 p.m., I finally headed home. The security guards, Ben and Mike still promoted to supervisory positions, smiled as I passed. "Have a good evening, Ms. Vance," Ben said. "See you tomorrow." "See you tomorrow," I confirmed, pushing through the revolving doors into the Manhattan night. Tomorrow. Such a simple promise, but one that meant everything. Tomorrow we'd continue building. Tomorrow we'd deepen relationships. Tomorrow we'd prove again that trust was the only foundation that mattered. The car drove through streets I'd traveled for 17 years, past buildings full of companies chasing the next big disruption. Let them Viridian Corp would be here when their revolutions consumed themselves, still standing on foundations that no CEO's ego could shake. My phone rang one last time. George Keller calling from Seoul, where he was opening a new office. Alara, quick question. Would Viridian be interested in partnering on our Asian expansion? I know it's outside your usual scope, but I trust you to figure it out. Trust the word that had saved a company, ended a CEO, and elevated a middle manager to the corner office. Send me the details, I said. We'll make it work. We always did. Not through disruption or revolution, but through the radical act of keeping promises, valuing people, and understanding that in business, as in life, the relationships you build are the only legacy that matters. The revenge I'd thought I wanted on that Tuesday morning had transformed into something better, success that needed no vindication, power that required no victims, leadership that built rather than burned. And if that wasn't the perfect ending to a story that began with humiliation in a marble lobby, I didn't know what was. The relic had not just survived, she had prevailed. And Viridian Corp was stronger for learning that sometimes the past wasn't something to be cleared away. Sometimes it was the foundation for everything that mattered. Thank you so much for listening to this story. I hope Alara's journey from humiliation to triumph resonated with you. Where are you listening from? I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. Have you ever witnessed or experienced a similar situation where someone's true value was only recognized after they were dismissed? Please subscribe to the Minister of Revenge channel and hit the like button if you enjoyed this story. And if you really want to help others discover this tale of corporate karma and redemption, please hit that hype button. Your support helps these stories reach more listeners who might need to hear that. Sometimes the worst day of your career can become the first day of your real success. Until next time, remember your value isn't determined by those who can't see it, but by what you build that can't be easily replaced.